Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everyone.
I'm in the presence of a newsmaker. You broke news yesterday. I don't always get to be 1 degree away from the centers of power, but you had a scoop. You had a get. As Booker parlance is, you booked Meet the Press host Chuck Todd for your podcast right on the heels of this Brian Williams scandal, and you got Chuck Todd on the record. Uh, where many have failed, Matt Lewis has succeeded.
Well, I think it was a matter of luck, actually. NBC.
Let's not be modest here.
Well, NBC and MSNBC had, up until that point, been very hush-hush. Nobody was really talking that much about the Brian Williams scandal. And I happened to have booked Chuck Todd to come on my podcast about a week earlier. To his credit, he didn't cancel because of this. He came on and
because of your towering influence.
Some could say,
he could not cancel on you and get away with that. He knew he had to face the music.
Oh yeah, yeah, because it's sort of like it would be like offending Johnny Carson or Ed Sullivan back in the day. His career would be over if he snubbed my podcast. No, he came on, and I mean, to be honest with you, we had a far-reaching conversation. We talked about the Super Bowl. He's a big sports fan. We talked about his father died when he was 16. We talked about what that was like, and about how he handles his. He told me that his prime goal in life is to live long enough to have a beer with his son because his father didn't live long enough to do that with him. So it was a very intimate. We did talk politics too. But in terms of the newsworthy part, yeah, I mean, I asked him about the Brian Williams thing. It wasn't like a huge controversy. He didn't call for Brian Williams to step down or anything, but I think he did have some interesting things to say, including the fact that Brian Williams is mortified by this, that the last thing he wanted to do would be offend veterans. And Chuck said, essentially, my friend made a mistake. My friend has apologized for the mistake, but none of us want to be judged by the worst thing we've done on our worst day, instead of the totality of our life and of our career. So, not a earth-shattering interview, but I think an interesting and revealing one. And I do want to put in a plug for the podcast, Bill. It's something I do. I don't do a lot of prep time on it. I don't. It's something I do. It's not my core sort of job, but in recent weeks I've had a great conversation with Chuck Todd, a great conversation with Tucker Carlson. Peter Wehner was on recently. Just a lot of interesting people, and it's just us talking for like a half hour, and you never know where it's going to go, but it's a lot of fun to do.
Well, it's a fantastic thing. You should not downplay the effort you put into it. I think it displays. You're not a one trick pony. You're a triple threat. So people should recognize that and check out the podcast. Now, I don't know if you have deeper thoughts about the Brian Williams controversy in general. I'm actually I'm struck by the fact. I think it was I think it was Jack Schaefer in Politico had a nice rundown of all the various politicians that have gotten into scrapes like this, and to me it kind of puts it into a context like not everybody is a monstrous liar. It's sort of a weird thing to get caught doing. But as I think, as Jack mentioned, but all of us at some point in our lives tells a story to our friends that we probably embellish to some degree because it makes it a better story, and you might not even totally realize that you're doing it, or you kind of realize it the first time, and you do it 5 more times, and and it all kind of blurs together in your mind,
Right. Well, I thought Jack Schaefer, I think it was in Politico magazine. I think, I think he had an interesting point, which is that, there is an evolution of how Brian Williams told this story. That the first several times he told it the way that it actually happened, and the story evolved over time. And things, stories tend to become, more grandiose as they go on. I'm reminded of Al Bundy and Married with Children. I guess by the time he was middle age, he had scored like 9 touchdowns in a high school game or something. So that does happen, but I do wonder though if Jack would have been as kind and forgiving to a politician. I mean, so in other words, politicians engage in this sort of fabulism or whatever, and media people like me and you and Brian Williams tend to be merciless in criticizing them. And here you have Schaefer, I think, essentially seeking to understand, like, why did Brian Williams do this? Why does this happen? And I'm not going to say he went easy on him because he didn't, but I do think that when he got into the sort of like psychology of why this happens, I'm not sure that we give, like, when a politician gets caught fabricating something, do we then, sort of couch it in? But, everyone sort of embellishes. I don't know that we do that.
Well, it depends a lot on the context. I mean, like some of the examples he mentioned, like with Ronald Reagan or with Senator Dick Blumenthal, there were things, but people eventually did forgive or look past it or just think it wasn't that big a deal. When it happened with Hillary Clinton, that Bosnia incident, it was in the heat of a bitter presidential primary. And
so you're talking about when Hillary Clinton claimed that she came under sniper fire,
right,
and she had to run with her head down to something like that, and
right.
that did become.
That was a very damaging incident for her, and if I remember the chronology, I think she was already losing that primary, but that definitely made it very hard for her to get back in it. It's kind of, but the media generally, at least initially, gives that a very harsh treatment, at first. And I think, part of the deeper question here, I mean, I think where Jack Schaefer kind of, I think, effectively lays out, it's like there is a certain human tendency to do this thing that's maybe not a wonderful human trait, but not necessarily indicative of deliberate manipulation and deceit. It's hard to know if someone's doing that sort of thing deliberately. It would seem not, because it's so easily fact checked. Why would you do it deliberately if you get humiliated so easily?
Yeah.
But I think there is sort of a larger question. How is that nobody at NBC caught this and went to Brian Williams and said, "Hey, buddy, that's not how you told the last time. We're a news operation. We fact check
I did.
things."
So I saw a report though, Bill. I mean, there've been so much reported on this, and it's so many conflicting stories. But no, I saw a report that somebody at NBC some of the higher ups did bring this to his attention and advise him to quit telling this story. And
we don't know what happened after that.
Right. So, but it is a weird thing because it's, number one, it's a provably false thing. Number two, you've got a guy who is already incredibly, obviously public relations savvy. Schaefer made an interesting point at the end, which it's speculation, but I think there's some truth to it. Is he sort of alleged that Brian Williams might sort of subconsciously feel guilty about going into a cover of war, but being very protected and being with generals and not, and so there may be a sense of guilt that he essentially really wasn't put in harm's way. But again, this is a grown man who is very media savvy. It's a weird thing. I will say this. I think some of, the pushback that Williams has received, I think, is understandable. The media industry has come under fire with, of course, Dan Rather, who's defending Williams. There's a question. People used to trust Walter Cronkite more than anybody else. I mean, this deals a blow to the sort of facade that these newsmen are all knowing and just, salt of the earth types. I mean, we're all human. But I think there's another interesting angle, which is, you know, I wonder how much of the conservative pushback is because NBC is affiliated with MSNBC, and because Brian Williams' daughter is on the HBO show Girls, which is really hated by a lot of conservatives because of Lena Dunham. So those are just a couple of interesting angles that I don't think have really been fleshed out, but they strike me as like if he had been at another network, then again you could make the argument, and I think this is also true, if Sean Hannity or Chris Wallace or Megyn Kelly had lied about something like this, I think it would have been a bigger story, and they would probably not have a job today.
I mean, this is a pretty big story. I don't feel like this is being ignored by, non-NBC media outlets. But if there is a conservative incentive to tar Brian Williams, I find it strange. I think Williams has on a number of occasions, gone out of his way to say we need to hear the voices of Middle America and be a check against liberal bias and all that, and not serve the coastal elites, that kind of thing. I mean, he's from Elmira, New York. He's not from a big city, kind of place. And I think NBC News has done a lot to separate themselves from MSNBC lately. I mean, they have separate websites now. They've really ceased to blur sort of the news side and the opinion side in their operations. I think Chuck Todd was a big push for that. I think he felt kind of weighed down by the MSNBC brand. He doesn't do an MSNBC show anymore now that he's doing Meet the Press. So it was like Brian Williams is sort of the wrong target if you're a conservative, in my personal opinion. But I think there might be a chance to beat up on media in general is just sort of too good to pass up.
Well, I also did see a quote that where Williams had said it was sort of making light of these, Cheeto bloggers with their Cheeto stained pajamas. I mean,
right?
That old trope. That's not a good. Did you see this too, Bill? And if so, I mean, that's not usually a good move to make.
But I take the point that it doesn't follow for me that if Williams made this error, that somehow discredits all of his reporting. I can't watch NBC Nightly News now because who knows what they say about the pharmaceutical industry is true. Yeah. There's no evidence there. There's some sort of like total breakdown of basic news gathering function. I mean, not that they shouldn't explore this and show why they got this thing wrong.
Okay, I agree with you, Bill. I think it would be irrational to extrapolate that from this. However, we know that we already are now living in a world where people are not trusting elites. They are not trusting. There is no consensus. We don't even agree on basic facts. We have countless examples. Even this story, the reporting has changed on it. Not any fault, as far as I know, not the fault of Brian Williams, but just contradictory information is now coming out. We live in a world now where people don't trust the government when it comes to vaccines. What the government is saying is right. People don't trust. They don't respect authority. The anchor of a network news program used to be a very revered and respected position. And I'm not saying that this ruins that, but I'm saying, isn't this just one more piece of evidence that's just destroying what was sort of left over from the days of having institutions and authority that we kind of respected?
I mean, I think definitely feeds into that general skepticism that people have, but that's not new. I mean, that's already been there. I mean, I think we already don't look at. I mean, not many people watch the nightly news as it is. There's a general diffusion of our media consumption.
Well, that's what you watch before you go to Jeopardy, right?
Right. Someday I'll be in a nursing home and I'll be doing that, I'm sure.
I work with a young guy here named Alex Pappas, who is a big Jeopardy fan, and he takes a lot of grief for his viewing habits.
But does he watch the nightly news first? Does he go right into nightly news, Jeopardy,
Probably.
Matlock? Is that his TV schedule?
Now you're sounding like Abraham. What was it, Homer Simpson's dad? What was his name?
Matlock.
Yeah. So anyway, look, we'll see how this continues to play out. But I think the one lesson we can agree on is go to iTunes, look up Matt Lewis in the News, rate it, review it, give it a 10, and listen to my conversation with Chuck Todd, where we get into this and we talk about Pete Carroll's insane decision to throw a slant across the middle of the field, Bill Belichick's refusal to call timeout. We talk about.
So you're saying the worst coach Super Bowl ever?
Well, look, my theory is that both coaches did they did exactly the opposite of what you would normally think a coach would do. And they did that because they don't want to be predictable, right? So if you're a sane, normal coach for the Seahawks, you hand the ball off. You either hand the ball off and try to run it in, or you have Russell Wilson, the quarterback, run it in. And if you're the coach of the Patriots, you call timeout. Honestly, you either let the Seahawks score so that you get the ball back with a minute left on the clock, or you call timeout and try to preserve some time on the clock. But both coaches did the opposite of what any sane person would do, and I think that's because they wanted to be unpredictable. And in the case of Belichick, it actually worked out. I think not calling the timeout obviously worked out. If it doesn't work, he becomes the GOAT. But that's my theory, that they both were acting irrationally on purpose.
I actually watched the game. My lone experience of American football this year.
I'm stunned. I'm stunned and a little disappointed.
And I was rooting for the Seahawks because I'm anti-cheating. So I was sad to see that happen. But I had the same instinctual reaction. Why would you throw a pass play on second and goal on the 1 yard line? But I haven't seen this in the post commentary justification. I mean, as Carroll said, Patriots were in goal line 4, and they were expecting a run up the middle, so it made sense to change up your play. And even if you didn't score, you at least would put the Patriots defense off guard. What are they going to do next time? You don't know if they're going to pass or run, because now it's a question. So I could see him trying to do that to try to spread the defense. And so with that, it was also pointed out that it was Lynch. Lynch is the running back's name. Beast mode.
Marshawn Lynch, yeah,
that's right. That he actually had a poor record on the 1 yard line over the course of the year. And
yeah. One out of 5 times he scored a touchdown. But look, I think this is all.
There are actually no instances of interceptions on pass plays on the 1 yard line throughout the entire season of the NFL. So it's not like it was a inherently risky move. But perhaps the court Russell Wilson should have been a better job of throwing the ball away if there was a lot of coverage.
But I think it's one thing to throw the ball, but the slant pass up the middle obviously was incredibly risky. And I think, look, I've read those same pieces too. And I think there's no way that Pete Carroll was thinking about those statistics when he made his call. I think that's reverse engineering an excuse. Like, after the people need to write like a contrarian think piece. But his own argument was, I saw a goal line, I want to do something different. That's his statement. I think that's true. I think that part is true. And I think the other part is true, is that Bill Belichick wanted to do something different. That both were doing the opposite of what a normal, sane coach would do. I think that, to me, that's what explains it. Both were trying to be utterly unpredictable. And in the case of Carol, I think it would have been better to think of it this way. Like, instead of thinking, what should I do, and I'll do the opposite, the way to think of it is, if I were on the other side, what's the last thing I would want them to do? And if I'm the Patriots, the last thing I want them to do is hand the ball to Marshawn Lynch. And that's what they should have done, because that's what the Patriots did not want them to do, in my opinion. Now, again, Pete Carroll, pretty good track record of coaching, and same thing with Bill Belichick. So who the hell are we? But anyway, fun game. And the fact that it came down to the last, couple plays, better than the vast majority of Super Bowls.
Absolutely. Let me shift gears. I was struck yesterday that conservatives were expressing outrage over Obama's comments at the National Prayer Breakfast. I feel like conservatives have sort of made a point of trying to politicize the prayer breakfast more and more, which has generally been kind of a bipartisan, unity type of event. Obama was speaking about radical Islamic terrorism, and I always hear conservatives say Obama needs to, call terrorism, radical Islamic terrorism. He should be politically correct about it, blah blah blah. And so here he is doing that. I want to read the actual statement so everyone knows what we're talking about. He says, "We see sectarian war in Syria, the murder of Muslims and Christians in Nigeria, religious war in the Central African Republic, a rising tide of anti-Semitism and hate crimes in Europe, so often perpetrated in the name of religion. So how do we, as a people of faith, reconcile these realities, the profound good, the strength, the tenacity, the compassion, and love that can flow from all of our faiths, operating alongside those who seek to hijack religion for their own murderous ends? Humanity has been grappling with these questions throughout human history. Unless we get on our high horse, and this is unique to some other place, remember that during the Crusades and the Inquisition, people committed terrible deeds in the name of Christ. In our home country, slavery and Jim Crow all too often was justified in the name of Christ. Michelle and I returned from India, an incredible, beautiful country full of magnificent diversity, but a place where in past years religious faiths of all types have, on occasion, been targeted by other peoples of faith, simply due to their heritage and beliefs. Acts of intolerance that would have shocked Gandhi, the person who helped liberate that nation. So this is not unique to one group or one religion. There's a tendency in us, a sinful tendency, that can pervert and distort our faith." So can you explain to me what is controversial about that? I mean, isn't he just saying that we should not let these Islamists pervert the Islamic faith and we should stand up to them? Isn't that what conservatives want him to say and make an argument for it in a way that doesn't seem like it's us versus them, where we're trying to destroy your entire religion and have like a new Crusades? What's wrong with framing it in that way?
Well, first let me say, I'm glad that you read a longer part of the speech than usually is getting cited, because, putting it in a broader context, a lot of the speech was quite good. And I think it softens the part that has become controversial when you understand the larger speech, as opposed to just like the soundbite that we're going to obsess on. However, having said that, I do think that that the backlash is predictable and not absurd. I think it's true for a couple reasons. One, when you consider the context where just a few days ago you have this Jordanian pilot, burned. The video, of course, was released a couple days ago of this just horrific murder. And within that context, having President Obama publicly criticize Christianity, as if there's some sort of moral equivalence, as if, things that Christianity engaged in, and, we talk about the Pulp Fiction line, it's going to get medieval. Well, a lot of these things happened during medieval times, Yes, Christianity acted medieval in medieval times, But today we have radical Islam, jihadi Islam in the 21st century doing these things. So I think there was a sense that there was a moral equivalency being drawn there. I think the other thing, too, is, frankly, not just the timing, but the messenger. There's that whole only Nixon can go to China thing, right? If a leader has sort of earned the right to criticize his own side, then I think that the lecturing and the sort of navel gazing is more accepted. But Obama has really, this has been a thing of his where he is frequently criticizing America, frequently, criticizing, sort of like Christianity wasn't perfect too. He spoke out against American exceptionalism. The Greeks think that they're exceptional too. So I think the fact that, the timing of it, the context of it, I think rubs a lot of people the wrong way.
I mean, it seems to me like, he's not saying Christianity is bad, don't be a Christian. He's speaking at the National Prayer Breakfast because he is a Christian. He's saying that, it's basically a pushback against the argument that Islam is inherently violent. It is sort of a uniquely violent religion that needs to be stopped. He's saying it's not unique to Islam. There's been all types of instances throughout history, and even today, where some examples are in the past and some examples are in the present. But the point is to say that all faiths have grappled with these issues at some point.
Well, I think that's
so. Let's not blame Islam directly. Let's stand up against those trying to pervert it. So he's not trying to dismiss the whole problem of religiously fueled terrorism. He's not trying to rationalize it and say these guys aren't so bad. Let's not be mad at them. He's saying we have to stop it, but he's trying to frame how to stop it in a way that doesn't come across as an us versus them deal.
Well, I'd say a couple things. One, he talked about the bad things about Christianity, including slavery, which, of course, some people sadly cited the Bible to justify. But he doesn't mention that Christianity, including William Wilberforce, an evangelical leading the fight to ban the slave trade. He doesn't talk about the civil rights movement led by Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, a Christian pastor. So I'd like to hear maybe at the National Prayer Breakfast, maybe instead of just dwelling on the negatives, but some of the positives. Christianity, as a faith, has done a lot of good in the world. That didn't get mentioned. I think that was a shame. The other thing too, I think is, I was on Morning Joe this morning talking about this very briefly. And a point that I brought up was, yes, what Obama said, a lot of things he said are true, and they're very appropriate within like an academic, esoteric discussion or context. But when you are the leader of a nation who is battling a horrific enemy, and many of us see this as a major Manichaean struggle between good and evil, and Joe Scarborough brought up this point. It would be like FDR, going against the Nazis and Nazism and that ideology, and then but sort of having a caveat as he's rallying the nation to stand up against fascism, saying, but let me be clear, what we did to the Native Americans was not good either. We engaged in atrocities, and that's technically true, but is that what a leader does who is in this existential struggle, who is really taking seriously the need to rally a nation, to bring a nation together, to confront evil? Is that really the appropriate role of a leader, especially one who hasn't really... look, this isn't fair, but if you're a Republican who's been saber rattling and wearing, flag lapel pins on your blazer for 8 years, it might be easier for you to then turn and say, to deliver this message. But I just don't know that Obama has the cachet, has earned the capital to lecture at this point. That's me, and it's not necessarily
Well,
fair, but I
well,
think
certainly,
it's
I
true.
think in the conservative character of him, he has not. But I mean, it seems like there is a sense that he was making the religion is the opiate of the masses argument. Religion is the cause of all of our violence throughout history. Therefore, religion is bad. I mean, and that's the Bill Maher argument. He's not making the Bill Maher argument. I mean, he is speaking at the prayer of breakfast, talking about his own personal faith and about humbly walking with God. So he's not making that argument. I think
Right.
there is a I mean, there is a belief, largely on the right, although Bill Maher on the left shares it as well, that we should be criticizing Islam as a faith, and if we don't do that, we're being sort of untrue and politically correct, and therefore failing to properly stand up to the problem. And Obama does not share that view, I think, morally, and he does not share that view strategically as a foreign policy approach. So why doesn't he, use the phrase radical Islam? I mean, clearly he sees a problem with using language that can be easily misinterpreted as him embarking on a crusade. And even George Bush was careful with that language a lot of the time. And
I agree. Look, there are some conservatives. There are plenty of conservatives who will tell you that Islam is inherently a violent religion, and that Muhammad was a warrior, and Jesus, was, a lot of people expected him to be a political savior, but in fact he was the opposite. And so that Christianity is a religion of peace, Islam is not inherently the case. So I don't want to get into that, but I will concede that there are some Americans and certainly some conservatives who believe that, and it's very important to them, not to me, but to them, to make that point. To me, I'm thinking about great political rhetoric and great leaders, and when Winston Churchill talked about defending Western civilization and Christendom. And I don't know that in the heat of battle up against a vicious opponent that they engaged in a whole lot of introspection and a whole lot of hand-wringing and navel-gazing and but let's be clear, we're not perfect either. We've made mistakes too. The only example that, somebody please feel free to chime in. The only example that I can think of is Abraham Lincoln, who really went out of his way to say, things like our enemies, the South, pray to the same God as we do, and things like that were very conciliatory. But of course, this was America, and he was arguing that we're a single, that we should be united. So I think that deserves an asterisk.
I can't think of another example off the top of my head, but there are some. There's an attempt here to try to, I think, be more sophisticated about how to handle a problem like this. I mean, this kind of asymmetrical warfare is not your typical World War II kind of war. There's a great emphasis on winning hearts and minds to cut off oxygen for terrorists to be able to recruit. So, I mean, how this kind of speech gets judged in terms of history will probably hinge greatly upon how well the operation against ISIS turns out. If they are eventually able to suffocate them and remove their stranglehold on a lot of the region, people look back at the speech and say, Obama really had the exact, right rhetorical approach to buttress the military strategy he was trying to engage in. If ISIS, runs wild and America's credibility is still besmirched in the eyes of the world, people would say this was insufficient to the task. So,
to me, the two last things I guess I would add to this. One is I feel like Obama could have just you don't have to attack Christianity in order to not attack Islam. And I felt like he felt like he had to. I'm going to say some things critical of Islam, but I have to now also attack Christianity. I think that was unnecessary and counterproductive. The other thing would be, you could certainly make an argument that even if you buy into Obama's premise, it's very unflattering to Islam. He's essentially suggesting that they're where Christianity was 1,000 years ago. And, I don't know that that's, I guess you could make an argument that like 1,000 years, yeah, I mean, but one religion then presumably is much greater evolved than the other. And so I'm not sure that that's an incredibly flattering argument. If I'm a Muslim, I don't know that that's exactly a flattering argument either.
I mean, it's obviously it's a fine line, but he's obviously trying to say that the people committing these acts are barbarians akin to what went on 1,000 years ago, and he's calling on more enlightened members of the faith to rise up and speak out against them. And he does it in a way. I mean, look, even some of the Bill Maher types, scold other Muslims, say, it's your job to speak out against this. There needs to be some sort of Muslim pope that calls this stuff out, as if you can sort of construct an entire religious political structure overnight, so there'd be a singular figure who can dictate these things. I think Obama's trying to say that we all of our faiths, we always have to check ourselves. He says, as people of faith, we are summoned to push back against those who try to distort our religion. Any religion for their own nihilistic ends. I mean, there have been, you have the Olympic bomber, here who was acting out of a Christian right, anti-abortion belief. Christian leaders, speak out against that. It's not the same scale, of course, going with ISIS, but these instances happen regardless of faith, all the time.
Right.
And Obama saying, we all have an obligation, in the name of religion, to protect our religion from people trying to pervert it.
Yeah, I think we all certainly agree on that. But again, this is playing. This is one example of a larger narrative about Barack Obama, how people view him, and how I think he views the war on terror, and how his worldview is not. I think it's telling of how he views this sort of as a police action. It's more or less a nuisance, but it's not a great clash between sort of Western civilization and barbarism. I don't think he sees it that way.
I don't think he sees it that way, but I don't think it's fair to say he sees it as a nuisance. I think he clearly sees this as a major global security problem. And I agree that the speech here is definitely a window into how he approaches it strategically. But I don't think that's the same as suggesting he thinks this is some sort of third-tier issue. It clearly consumes a whole lot of his foreign policy time.
All right. Well, I think we're finishing early, Bill. That's fine, though.
Well, didn't you want? I do want to talk about one other thing. I did have a piece in Politico this week called "The GOP Elite Puts Its Foot Down," looking at the aftermath of the Romney pullout, and also the Sarah Palin debacle that you wrote about a week earlier, because I married the two incidents to suggest that we already knew that the Republican establishment wanted to kind of clamp down on the primary process. Reince Priebus, the RNC chair, was cutting the number of debates. He was making them party-sanctioned debates. We're not going to let the media dictate who's going to moderate. He more recently said he's going to have a poll threshold. So if you don't clear a certain poll threshold, you can't be in the debate. It's clearly an attempt to keep some of the also-rans who say wacky things, to keep those folks off the stage. And now you have so that's sort of like the GOP establishment versus the Tea Party. There's that dynamic. Now you have these two other dynamics where you have Republican establishment forcing Romney out, saying, "Look, you're not, Herman Cain and Michelle Bachmann. They're not the only jokes right here. You're a joke. You're gonna make this primary seem like a joke. We're gonna cut off your money so you can't run." And Romney saw the writing on the wall because his past donors were circulating emails saying, "Get this guy out of here." Romney said, "Okay, I gave him my shot. Clearly, I got no oxygen. I got to get out." That's sort of an easy thing to do when you're going out. If you're trying to force out an establishment candidate, you cut off his money, he goes away. A Tea Party type candidate isn't expecting to raise a lot of money. He's expecting to live off media attention by saying provocative things. That's a harder thing to contain. But now you have the conservative elite drumming Sarah Palin out. It seems, although she's getting a CPAC gig, so it's not comprehensive. But as you were previously, you had overt criticism of Palin coming from the right after that speech. But I also think you had sort of an implicit pushing out where the conservative elite was hyping Scott Walker out of that Iowa Freedom Summit debate, not Ben Carson, not Mike Huckabee, certainly not Sarah Palin. Let's elevate the guy who is currently in office, has a record, has won in a blue state. Let's give this guy the push, and maybe that will indirectly marginalize these other pretenders who, if they dominate the debate stage, is going to make all of us look stupid. So you have, I think, a convergence of interest between the moneyed establishment and the conservative opinion elite. It doesn't mean they're all coming together around Jeb. They don't necessarily agree how the party should recalibrate ideologically, but there seems to be a common purpose to get the jokes off the stage, or at least diminish their presence on the stage the best they can. And I think that is a message to Hillary to say, you may not be able to dismiss the field the way you could in 2012 by saying, like, these guys are all a bunch of clowns. And if Mitt Romney maybe isn't personally a clown, he's pandering to the clowns and is in debt to the clowns. There's the self-deportation lines and such say he's in league with them. You may not get that easy attack line this time around, which means you got to start. That might mean when preparing to tackle their ideas more head on, having more of a wonkier debate with them, and also may mean for Hillary, you got to jump in earlier. If these guys are looking good, if people are liking the things that they're talking about, that might suggest you got to get in there and start attacking it. Now, we may not be there yet because you have all this vaccine stuff going on. Even Jeb is not putting a lot of meat on the bones policy-wise. So some folks on the left said to me, "You're saying this is not a clown show. These guys look like clowns already." Like, I'm not saying there are no clowns. But if there is this pressure coming from above, from both sort of the middle and the right, over the course of the race, it may look a lot different than what you saw in 2012. And I think Democrats should be girded for that.
Yeah, I think it's you got a couple of things happening. On one hand, I think that the field is a lot stronger. These candidates, are better prepared, more serious, more qualified, by and large, than they were in the last two cycles on the Republican side. And I think that Reince Priebus has taken steps to sort of mitigate some of the problems of the past, to avoid numerous debates, and to also speed up the primary process so that you don't have things devolve into ugliness. And so that's the positive side. I think the downside is that the base and the incentives haven't changed, and the base hasn't changed that much. And so you're going to still have, you may have smarter, more qualified, more experienced candidates, but they're going to oftentimes get drawn into saying things to pander to the base that will not play well with the media. I personally think that the sort of libertarian strain of conservatism that's been prominent since Obama and the Tea Party was part of what pushed Mitt Romney into that 47% comment that I think he thought donors wanted to hear. I think that, the fact that Chris Christie, who has no problem telling people to get the hell off the beach, who has no problem with mandates, stumbled over the vaccine question, has to do with the fact that there is this ethos on the right about, oh, you can't tell anybody what to do, you can't mandate anything. I think he was sort of caught flat-footed there. The pioneers take the arrows.
I think Christie got a bad rap on that one. I mean, I'm not an anti-vaxxer by a long shot. My kids are vaccinated. But I mean, all Christie said was that parents deserve a measure of choice, which, whether you might disagree with that, but that is the law of the land in 48 of 50 states. So he wasn't saying anything that was not current policy. Whereas Rand Paul was saying things that are more actively questioning of the vaccines themselves and being kind of weirdly anti-science-y. Like, that to me is more damaging. I thought Christie was simply, and I know there's some stuff he said in the past that led people to question more, but I thought the comment that he made this past week, in and of itself, is not contradictory to what all state laws, say for West Virginia and Mississippi, currently do, and that doesn't deserve massive attack. Now, I think he's had other problems this week as far as his junkets are concerned, and now he got a new federal investigation going on as far as his political payback operation, alleged political payback operation. So I'm still on the Chris Christie is going absolutely nowhere camp, but I thought the vaccine thing was a little unfair.
Well, it may be unfair, but it became a huge distraction for him, essentially ruined his trip to London. And fair or not, he got lumped in with Rand Paul and the anti-vaxxers.
And he also had the problem that his standards seemed to differ for vaccines than for Ebola and the nurse. So that was a fair shot against Christie.
It seemed inconsistent with his. I mean, he seems to have no problems with telling people that they need to get in line and do what they need to do. And so I suspect that it had to do with the sort of like Tea Party vibe ethos of like you can't tell anybody what to do. Anyway, my larger point though is that yes, I think that the RNC has implemented structural things that will prevent the clown car from metastasizing. I think that you have a stronger crop of more qualified, experienced candidates. However, I still think that there is a problem, a pander problem, and an incentive problem with the base. So I'm not, I'm more optimistic than I was 4 years ago, but I also think that, there's plenty of room for them to say or do stupid things, and there are Bill, again, this is why I'm writing my book to address these structural problems that need to be fixed for conservatism to have this renaissance that I believe it will have.
Right, and as I said in my own piece, I mean, I acknowledge those cross currents. I said, Republican leaders can't control who gets in and what they say. It's not like there is an ultimatum that's been sent out, and no one shall say stupid things forevermore. But it did strike me as notable that there are camps that are not just among the donors, but also amongst the Rush Limbaugh types. I'm extrapolating that seem to want to exert some adult supervision here, and I think if you have the Rush Limbaughs, indirectly helping. I mean, he wasn't out there, I think, slamming Sarah Palin, but he's elevating Scott Walker.
Right.
If he's helping with that project, that is a boon to the project. So it's not just seen as establishment versus Tea Party.
Right, and it's a sign that I've been seeing, and why I hope that the timing of this book is appropriate, because I do see that the fever's breaking. But I would also point out, simultaneously, Mark Levin, a popular radio host, is bashing Scott Walker, calling him for amnesty.
For amnesty? What did he ever say about immigration?
Well, apparently he's not sufficiently anti-immigration enough. I think that he's said things in the past like, we need to secure the border, but you also should consider possibly having a pathway to citizenship. Crazy things like that.
I mean, I'm not aware. I saw his comments on ABC over the weekend where he didn't say that.
Well, I think he's probably had to walk. I think he's probably had to walk it back a little bit.
Stuff.
Well, he's probably had to walk it back a little bit because of this criticism, but it's out there. There is a segment of conservatism that believes that Scott Walker is a shamnesty shill.
I just flipped on to Google. I came across Political Fact that Scott Walker flip flop on an immigration and pathway to citizenship. They gave him a half flip. I did not know this.
So he flipped, but he didn't flop. I guess.
So in February 2013, he said we gotta embrace a legal pathway, but did not say citizenship. In July 2013, in a local newspaper interview, said it makes sense, quote unquote, that people could not only stay here but get citizenship with the right mix of penalties and waiting periods and other requirements, and never endorsed any specific bill in Congress. But at a Politico conference, he did not dismiss legislative action if some nuances were addressed. Quote, you got to find a way to make it legally possible for people moving forward. Okay. So
clearly he cannot be trusted.
Right. I did not know he wasn't perfect. I thought he was a pure conservative perfection.
Well, I think he is the best you get in terms of uniting both factions of the establishment and the Tea Party. But none of them are without blemish. Nobody gets out of this alive, so to speak. But to me, the bigger problem with Scott Walker is does he have the charisma? And I seriously question.
Does he have what? Oh, the charisma?
Does he have the charisma? Can you imagine him being the president? Does he have the right look, the right energy? I question that. I'm dubious, to be honest with you.
Well, I don't know if you've seen the ad he ran when he first ran for governor, the brown bag ad, where he's in his kitchen, he's packing himself a lunch. He's like, like Wisconsin, I pack my own lunch so I can save money to the things I need to afford, like Wisconsin taxes. And then he goes on to say, government should live within its means and people create jobs, not government, blah, blah, blah. But he had a whole brown bag theme throughout that campaign. He plays the middle class stuff super hard. It's very much the antithesis of Mitt Romney. And it has its own, I think it's not, it's not Barack Obama charisma. It's not Bill Clinton charisma. But it's not dry wonkiness either. He definitely has a persona that he's comfortable with, and has behooved him in Wisconsin.
Right, but this is the NFL. This is the NFL.
But what charismatic giant is he up against in this race? I mean, who's the rock star that he has to overcome here? I mean, Jeb Bush.
I think Hillary Clinton has a star power. Maybe not by the force of her personality, but just by the force of her celebrity status. I mean, to me, the people on the right, on the Republican side, who have the charisma, who feel like they could be president, to me, it's Christie, Rubio, and Perry are the three who have the star power, for what that's worth.
I mean, all those three have other weaknesses that may be very hard to overcome.
Sure, absolutely. But when I look back at who do we elect in the modern era, there are plenty of good men and women who are deserving of the presidency, but I don't think make the cut. I mean, Obama obviously was a superstar. And George W. Bush, in his own way, had that charisma, that swagger. Reagan was literally a movie star. Ever since Kennedy, LBJ, of course, inherited the office. I don't know. I think you.
Yeah, but I feel like Hillary's not a gangbusters orator. Jeb Bush is not a gangbusters orator.
Well, Well, I didn't mention Jeb Bush in my list.
But yeah, I mean, Christie has charisma, but that comes with a massive downside.
Yeah.
Perry is still very damaged from the last run. I think it's very hard to see him overcome. He certainly has not succeeded in overcoming it so far. His poll numbers are terrible. He's not being taken very seriously. And Rubio, is sort of like the right package. Just that, but since he botched immigration so badly, doesn't come into the race with an underlying reason, like why he is somehow
still performing well in the Matt Lewis primary.
Yeah, it's true. So I just don't see this entire field as having a very high bar for charisma. I don't think Scott Walker is the worst when it comes to charisma. I think he may have an issue with policy chops. He came across pretty thin talking about immigration, talking about Syria in the ABC This Week interview on Sunday. But it's very early. There's some early interviews that Obama did in 2007 where he was not so hot. But
Obama had like 19 debates or something, and he got.
Well, that's why I feel like this whole notion of number of debates is sort of misnomer. He had 26 debates. He had 26 debates in 2007, 2008, and they strengthened him over time. It's not having debates. It's what you say in them and how the whole party looks.
Well, and I also think though there were 3 candidates, right? I mean, John Edwards, Hillary.
Well, eventually, but you had a point where you had Dennis Kucinich on the stage and you had Chris Dodd on the stage.
Joe Biden probably.
Joe Biden, but the collective nature of the stage, the serious to clown ratio on that stage was still pretty heavily tipped to serious. Whereas when it's like Romney and a whole bunch of nuts, that whole image looks different. And Romney seems like he's being dragged down by that weight.
And I also think, I know I don't want to harp about this because it's so cliche, but I do think that the media is biased against Republicans. I think they like tearing down Republicans. So giving them the opportunity to, with the incentives for the clown car candidates to run and to get attention, with the incentives to pander to the base, and then with the fact that I think the liberal media loves to tear them down. There's not a lot of good reasons to expose them to 26 debates. Even if it means that some of the candidates won't get the seasoning that they might have gotten otherwise.
Well, let's leave it on that note, sir. Always good to talk to you. Check out the Matt Lewis podcast with Chuck Todd. Good weekend listening.
Yes.
And we'll catch you next week.
All right. See you, Bill. Thanks, guys.